Hey everybody, got another video here for you. Okay, the fuzz has been raised and you can feel it. It's a little bit of peach fuzz. Temperatures yesterday were about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Don't know what that is Celsius. Maybe around 21, 22 Celsius, something like that. And it dried on the outside, but it still felt cold compared to the wood that's inside here. And so I brought it inside and hung it over the kerosene heater for maybe half an hour. And that warmed up the wood and that raised all the fuzz. And so now it's time to hit it with some 320. I'm actually tempted to go straight to 600 because the peach fuzz is so fine. But it's not going to be hard to sand this. I'm just going to do it by hand right quick. And so running through, 320 and then 600 is not going to be a big deal. So I'll be back. There it is, sanded to 320. And I think it's actually smooth enough for lacquer right now. There's no need to really go any finer than 320. Because, I mean, you're going to cover it with lacquer and then you want to sand the lacquer over top of it. So, this just has to be relatively flat and smooth. It really doesn't matter, just as long as it doesn't interfere with how smooth your lacquer is. That should be smooth enough. So, yeah, this should be ready to go to the paint shop. So, while the lacquer on the body, first coat, is drying, time to sand this thing off. I'm going to knock this thing off. I'm not worried about getting a clean break on the finish here since I'm going to be sanding this whole thing down. Otherwise, I'd probably come in with like a razor blade or something and try to score that first to get a clean break. But shouldn't really be necessary here. This might be a tough one. There it goes. One nut. Okay, headstock is all sanded, and now I'm going to raise the grain, spray it with a little water. What it is that oftentimes I'll get such nice results from this is just 60 grit, and it's real nice. And I'll get such nice results that I'll forget this. And but a lot of times I'll use wood-based Kita wood dye on my builds. And so then once you dye it, and that's water-based, that then raises the grain, and once it's all dried, it'll have a little bit of fuzziness to it. And it'll be like, oh yeah, forgot about that. So, not that it really interferes with the final finish or anything usually, but yeah, it's a little detail to be taken care of. So yeah, I'm gonna squirt this. And then, once it dries, sand it down with some 320, and then this should be ready for lacquer as well. Okay, so here's another one of these tips. This is the body for guitar 11, and it's in Paintshop drawing. Just got its third coat of lacquer, and after 2 light coats, it had an almost perfect satin finish on it, but it was starting to get a little build up at the heel, so I decided to keep on going. I almost stopped with the satin; it looked so nice. And but now after the third coat, I'm starting to get some build, and I got just, 1 or 2 little runs in it already. So the tip is that what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep on squirting, let it dry. My first impulse was to, oh, I've got to run. Maybe if I put more on, it'll even things out. And no, that's not the way to go. So yeah, I was like, no, you don't want to do that. So it takes forbearance, but you just stop squirting, you hang it up. All the rest was already evenly coated, and I was just hitting the last spot and got a little run. And so yeah, I just stopped squirting, hung it up, and it's drying now. The timer's going, and once it's dry, that was the third coat. It's probably going to require 4 or 5 coats at least, and I'm just going to keep on going and leave the run in there and let it build over the run. And then when the time comes, since it's lacquer, all that's going to melt together, and it won't get layering like I would with poly. With poly, you'd have to fix that right away. Once you do the same thing, you'd stop squirting or whatever and let it dry. But then with poly, you'd have to knock it back down and then re-skim coat the whole thing in order to try to hide depending on how bad it was, yeah. If it's not too bad, you can just knock it back down immediately and preserve a uniform film of poly on the top. See, it's when you break through from one film of poly to the next, because the films of poly build on top of each other and don't melt together the way lacquer does. That's why lacquer's more forgiving. So with the poly, as soon as you get that, you got to knock it down. That might be why people like to sand after every round of poly, to knock down, any orange feel you get. But yeah, so with the lacquer, it's safe to go ahead and keep building until you're done, and then just sand it down, and it'll all melt together, and you won't get any rings where it's cut from one layer of the other to the next or anything like that. So that's what I'm going to be doing here. Alright, that's your tip for the day, I guess. So here's another little tip for you. When you do get runs and you're waiting for it to dry, the runs are going to take longer to dry than the rest of the stuff. The timer just went off, and everything on that body is dry except for the runs. And right now my thumb is sticking to the phone because of the lacquer, the sticky lacquer on my thumb from where I checked it. And so yeah, I set the timer to run another 30 minutes and wait and see. So guitar 11 has gotten 4 or 5 coats of lacquer, and the runs, you can see kind of the shiny lines, the edges of where the runs used to be. It's all flat now. Another thin coat of lacquer will cause all this to melt together and all those marks to disappear. Yeah, so it got 4 or 5 coats of lacquer and then knocked back with 320. Same for the headstock. And now it's time for another coat of lacquer, and then maybe hit it with 600 and 1500 and buff, kind of a thing. So, guitar's out of the paint shop. We've got 4 or 5 coats of lacquer and sandback 320, another coat, like a polish almost with 600, and then a buff. And yeah, it turned out okay. There's still ever so slight someplace here. I don't even know if the camera will pick it up. There's a little edge run mark or two in there, but this is all going to be covered by that panel, so yeah, turned out pretty nice. And headstock, once again, turned out pretty nice. So yeah, all nice and shiny and smooth and stuff like that. So next thing is going to be working on the neck, get the nut on it, get the tuners on it, and that would be it to start. And then put the neck on the body, start putting the guitar together. So here's the neck with the tape off. Nothing's changed except for the headstock is no longer painted black with a gloss clear coat. It's now just natural with a gloss clear coat. And the nut just came in today, so I'm in luck. No work stoppage. So, fitting the nut, we've got ever so slight of a groove here, only like it's maybe a mil on this side after me sanding stuff, and maybe a mil and a half right there. So yeah, still have a hint of a groove. That's probably going to need to go away so that we can get something kind of flat shim or the nut itself right there. So that would probably be the first step. And for something like this, for that small amount of material, I think that little sanding block that I have, that I use for stand more than anything else. You probably seen me use it for stand a few times, but it's actually designed to do this. And this is it. It's just a little chunk of a piece of 2x4 with, this was originally 80 grit, but by now it's more like about 150. But yeah, this is what I use in this kind of a situation in order to take this kind of thing down. Let me get the camera a little closer. Okay, so here's what we're looking at in profile. It's just that little bit of a dip and then a hump. And what we want to do is bring it all down to be a more or less level shelf. So just very carefully keeping you want to keep the block parallel to this line for the fingerboard, and you want this face of the block to be perpendicular to the fingerboard, and that way you get a nice even shelf. And you do have to make sure that you take the same amount off of both sides. And I might actually have to switch to some different tool because there's really not a lot of grit left on this thing. Yeah, I'm going to need something a little more aggressive. There you go, something a little more aggressive. Sanding block with a piece of 60 grit on it, fresh piece. And notice I've got it right at the end, so there's no sandpaper here to rub up against this part. And this should make quick work of things. Once again, I gotta keep everything all nice and level in this direction. Just like that. Okay. This edge is pretty much even. So is that edge, actually. What's that looking like? It's not looking bad, actually. Let me take it just a little bit more. Yeah, this kind of thing. Come on, camera. Patience, folks. Supposedly, well, maybe I'm too close. Can you focus on that? Let me try again. Oh, that's a little better. That might be good enough for government work. On a Floyd Rose, they come up and they actually kind of tilt back a little bit before you get to the actual slot. And so depending on the angle you've got, if you put it in flat, the slot is actually ever so slightly behind the nut line by 0.2 of a mil, let's say. So yeah, it's okay if it tilts ever so slightly this way as opposed to being perfectly flat. And I think that's where I'm at now. But I can't tell because the battery's about to go dead and the screen just got very dim. So, yeah, that's probably going to do it for now for filming for a while. Unfortunately. Or maybe I can get a power cord hooked up on this thing. So, checking out the nut here. Got a fret pulling guard. Makes a nice straight edge for this job. And want just a little bit of action, just a little bit of clearance at the first fret when I'm on the second fret and I'm in the slot here. And I'm gonna definitely have to raise this up a little bit, 1 mil to 2 mil, something like that, and then even more at the back. In order to get it flush, it's got to be like almost tilted forward to get it flush against the end of the fingerboard. Okay, I figured out that it needs 1 mil of shim in order to get it at the correct height here at the front edge. So the next step is I take my 1 mil of shim, I go ahead and glue it in, glue it on, and then I hold this in place, and then I can put other shims back under here to figure out exactly how big that back shim should be. And then I cut a small back shim, say like maybe 1/3 the width of this, and glue it along the back. And then that gives me a front edge and a back edge that are at the correct height so that I can just lay a bead of glue across each one and slap it on down. Okay, I think that's going to do it for this video. So until the next one, everybody, have a good one.